Welcome to Between the Sheets, the podcast where we're going to cover a variety of topics related to sexual health and wellness. I'm Dr. Stephanie Zwonitzer, your host. I'm a nurse practitioner and have been in practice since 2017. I have my Doctor of Nursing Practice degree, and I specialize in urology and sexual health. I am so excited to explore all of the various topics related to sexual health and wellness with you in a fun, spicy, educational, and non-judgmental manner. So come on, let's get between the sheets. Hey everybody, welcome back to Between the Sheets. I am over the moon excited today. I have an amazing guest on, and we're going to have a lot of fun around BDSM today. So welcome Julia Satterlee. She is a clinical psychologist dedicated to kicking shame out of the bedroom and sparking joyful intimacy. Since 2019, she has been coaching couples, men and women, championing pleasure and connection as essential, not optional. Of course, it's optimal. Julia's work revolves around exploring and expressing needs, desires, and boundaries in a judgment-free environment. Her approach combines self-love strategies, effective communication techniques, and myth-busting insights into sex and intimacy, all with a dose of fun. She's a certified sexologist, American Board of Sexology, and a certified sex coach through Sex Coach U, with over 20 years of experience, sex education, adult education, human rights, advocacy. Julia's private practice is inclusive and welcoming to those who are kinky or kink curious, gender and sexually diverse, and ethically non-monogamous. Fueled by her love of people, chocolate, nature, long bike rides, and poetry, she firmly believes that the world becomes a better place when we all embrace and celebrate our unique sexistential spark. You can learn more and get in touch at www.pleasure-wise.com and follow her at pleasure.wise on Instagram. Get her weekly emails filled with all things pleasure-wise, from strategy to silly memes, and you can sign up at tinyurl.com/pleasure practice, and I'll have all those links down in the description below for you guys. So welcome, Julia.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for having me on. I'm so excited to be here today. Talk about one of my all-time favorite topics. And I think that hopefully we can have a lot of fun with this conversation and share some helpful strategies and ideas for anyone listening in.
Yes, absolutely. This is one of my favorite topics to get into. I think that it's not talked about enough, and there's so many stigmas and everything around it. And so I'm really excited to shed some light on it and help people understand things better.
Wonderful. So I am happy to dive right in.
Yes, please do.
I'm going to be talking about BDSM, which is so for some people, a scary sounding acronym, right? And for others, it's like, oh, yay, you're talking about that. So I'm going to break it down a little bit for anybody who's like, ooh, what is that anyway? What does that even stand for? And then we'll talk a little bit more about how I view BDSM as a professional in the field of human sexuality, as well as kind of what I've learned are the most helpful aspects of BDSM for everybody's sex life. So you don't have to be kinky already. You don't have to identify as part of the BDSM community to get some new ideas and learn some new things from our chat today. So I'd love for people to stick around if they're at all curious in this moment.
Yes.
So there's lots of different definitions of BDSM. I think the thing that's most important to me is that it is adult consensual play with sensations and or power, right? In a nutshell, it is sex outside of the box in the sense of it being more expansive than what we normally think of as just sexual activity. It's a lot more playful, but also a lot more consensual. A lot more communication and negotiation is involved. So I'm going to get into all those details in a second, but that's the kind of the general definition: adult consensual play with sensations and or with power. The actual acronym stands for a few different things. It can stand for the BD part, bondage and discipline. The DS part, dominance and submission, and the SM part, sadomasochism. So a little bit of sadism, a little bit of masochism, someone giving, someone receiving, or some back and forth. There's all kinds of different roles and slang and terminology associated with lots of things in the BDSM community. So if you're somebody that's unfamiliar or that's new to this, you're just starting out, but you're interested and you're like, oh my God, why do I have to know so many terms? Like, why is there so much terminology? Bear with me, right? We're
Yes.
not going to dive into all the terms today, but it is worthwhile to learn some of those, but kind of slowly over time. You don't need to know everything to participate in a safe and fun way for yourself and a partner. So don't stress out if you're like, even just the acronym is like 18. Why?
Yes.
You
Yes.
don't have to remember all that. There's not a quiz later. You're fine.
Right. Right. Yes.
Consensual adult play. Stick with that part, right?
There
You're
you
good
go.
to go. Another definition, I do want to share one more definition though that I really like because it goes back to this kind of sex outside of the box. And that is a definition by Z. Gris or Gris. I don't know how to pronounce their last name. I should know by now. I quote them regularly. They say that kink is sexual desires, behaviors, and identities that challenge social approval, giving you the
Nice.
opportunity to explore your courage, shame, pleasure, and liberation.
Oh, I love that.
Oh.
Little something for everybody.
Right. And so it can be that deep and it can also be a little more simple and playful depending on what you're doing. It's up to you. But I really like to throw out all these different things associated with it and give people some fresh ideas because I think some of the time people hear the term BDSM and they kind of associate it with like, oh, we're going to go to the dungeon and it's
Right.
all like lots of pain and screaming and whip
Yeah.
and I don't know, right? Like it's
Right.
this very dark and dreary, dangerous sort of situation.
Right.
And I find that people who are actually playing in BDSM are like, ooh, yes, dangerous. Let's talk about it. Oh, let's make this so fun, right? They're like
Yes.
tend to be kind of giddy and oh,
Yes.
everybody's different, but there's a whole lot of giddiness and silliness and
Oh,
fun.
for sure.
Ah,
Yeah. It's playful.
exactly. Being
Yeah.
free to be more of who you are and who you're not in your everyday life.
Yes.
A little bit outside of that general kind of like responsible citizenship that that is
Yeah.
important in our lives, but we need an erotic space that is a bit different from that. And
Yeah.
BDSM gives us that permission to get outside of that typical, normal, responsible self and be
Yeah.
something a little bit different. That's all in good fun between two or more people who want it to be like this.
Yes.
Like
I love
playing
it.
dress up when you're kids, like playing role play,
Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons, like cops and robbers, right? Like all of
Yep.
those sorts of things, except the adult version,
Right.
possibly with orgasms.
Yes. Hopefully with orgasms.
But some people are into different forms of BDSM and different ways to play, and not everybody associates it with their sex life. They might have play partners that are not their sex partners. And like I know some folks who participate in rope play, for example,
Mm-hmm.
in bondage with rope, which is please learn carefully about it before trying to engage in this.
Yes.
But I know folks that use rope as like part of their practices to like relax and
Mm-hmm.
help their anxiety, and it's really
Yeah.
a really beautiful healing mechanism for lots of people because there's so much consent involved, because there are these potentially altered states of mind without drugs or alcohol.
Right.
A lot of potential in BDSM with or without the sex part.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's like a really long. I please feel free to interrupt me. I talk a lot. I get really excited. Sometimes I talk too fast. If you're like, "What? Hold on, slow down, back up. Let's repeat that." by all means, let me know, because I do get into it and I get to talking in great depth about all the things. Okay, so I want to just restate that again, that it is really different from abuse. I think that's one of the really big myths that comes up,
Mhm.
is that like people who practice BDSM are abusing other people. That's absolutely not true. There can be abuse happening, and if that's the case, it is abuse. It is not BDSM, right?
Mhm.
Some people will
Correct.
use BDSM ideas, but under the guise of BDSM, it's abuse.
Right.
There's not complete, full, enthusiastic consent of
Yes.
people really like, yes, I absolutely want to do that.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
That's what we want to see.
Absolutely.
That's one of the biggest things. The other thing is just the myth that BDSM is like for damaged people, right?
Mhm.
BDSM is only like for folks that are kind of too freaky or sick
Sure.
or stupid, or, right? There's that sort of stigma
Yeah.
associated with it. And that's absolutely not true. Lots of research has been done, a decent amount of research considering the topic has been done around sort of the correlations between mental health and BDSM. And while some folks who do play with BDSM have experienced trauma, that's because lots of people in the world have experienced
Right.
trauma, including
Right.
sexual abuse and things. There's not a larger portion of trauma in the BDSM community. It's about the same as other races. There's not more mental health issues. It's about the same as
Yeah.
non-kinky people, right? So like, quit shaming people for mental health issues anyway.
Right.
It's a tough world out there.
It
Everybody's
is.
doing their best.
That's right.
So I like to like clarify those icky myths that are all
For sure.
shamey and because there
Yes.
is a lot of shame sometimes for folks when they're discovering what they like and that they're into BDSM.
Yeah.
That's understandable. So bust those myths. No, ma'am. No, sir. We're not doing that. But I'd love to talk a little bit, if it's all right, Stephanie. And again, stop me if you have any questions or things
Sure.
you want to chime in about. But I'd love to chat a little bit about, I mentioned earlier, the principles that are in the BDSM community that I think can benefit everybody's bedroom.
Yeah.
There's four
Absolutely.
aspects of BDSM that are crucial in the BDSM community that I wish other people would practice. Please, please, non-kinky people, like, hook it up with these practices, please. It will so benefit your sex life and just your general communication, right? Like,
Yeah.
good communication makes for better sex, period. But
Absolutely.
we'll break it down. So the four areas are creativity and play, right? We already mentioned play and how important that is. Negotiation, open discussion of boundaries and desires. Ongoing consent, right? I keep
Yes.
hammering about that consent part, but we're going to talk about what ongoing consent looks like. And then aftercare and reflection. Those are the four pieces of the puzzle that I like to really put out there, hammer
Yeah.
into people's brains like, oh,
Absolutely. Yeah, those are the 4 areas that are definitely needed, and like you said, not just in the BDSM community, but for everybody, because those are 4 big issues, so let's talk about them.
right. With this first part, the creativity and play part, it's one of the biggest things that can really keep long-term relationships going and keep
Mm,
them healthy and full of sexual and emotional intimacy is to incorporate play and think outside of the norm or the box. What's
yeah.
average? What's what you're supposed to do? What you should do? And I think this really comes from especially kind of like normal heterosexual interactions with sex, we tend to think about sex as just intercourse, right? Like
Right.
maybe oral is included in our idea of sex, but in general, it's like these activities constitute
Mhm.
sex, and that's it.
Right.
And if you're thinking about it like that, and that's all it is, then anytime like bodies are not functioning the way that we want them to, our schedules aren't functioning the way that we want them to, anytime that things change in our lives and we can't quite follow what we're supposed to like or what we're
Mhm.
supposed to want, or just when we get bored, right?
Yeah.
As like humans, we do, even if the sex is good and things are
Mhm.
mostly fun and feeling good, bodies are working well. Even with all of those things, at some point you're gonna need to change it up,
Yep.
right?
Or
Couples
your
need.
desires change over time.
Absolutely, absolutely, especially with, different life changes, different body
Mhm.
changes. Lots of women, I think one of my favorite things in Esther Perel's book, Mating in Captivity, she talks about postpartum, women who stop liking things that
Mhm.
they used to like, either because their body is totally different, but
Mhm.
also their eroticism changes because now you have a kid tied to you all the
Yeah.
time, right? Like
Yeah.
totally
And
different.
your nipples that used to be used for pleasure are now used for feeding, and so they you don't want them for pleasure or whatever. There's such a variety. Absolutely.
Right, right. She gives a case study about a woman who, like, maybe used to like submission in BDSM and now is finding like that's not so appealing because she's kind of feeling tied down in her
Yeah.
daily life. So the bondage she used to play with is not feeling very playful right now.
Right. Sure.
I think that's such a great example of how our tastes can change throughout our lifespan, and our tastes change even, in the course of one session with
Oh,
our
yeah.
partner, right? Like what feels good in one moment doesn't always feel good 20 minutes later when you're playing in a different way or
Yeah.
when your arousal has increased or decreased, right?
Mhm.
So thinking about it like that, it's just so, so important to not make assumptions
Mhm.
about what we're supposed to like or what our partner's supposed to like, to not follow this kind of like baseball rule book, right? Like
Yeah.
we start with kissing, then maybe
Yeah.
there's some touching of the nipples, and then
Right.
we're gonna put our hands on genital, right? Like it's
Right.
not baseball, it's not middle school. Like, please let's stop with the things have to go this sort of way. Like,
Yes.
please, let's break out of that. And so that's what that creativity and play part is about, is just about reframing our ideas about how we can connect physically and energetically and playfully together. What kinds of things feel good, making sure that we're rediscovering what feels good for me, what feels
Yeah.
good for you. Like, what are you into right now? What would be interesting? What would you like to try out? I was reading a statistic the other day that it's not that we need like tons and tons and tons of novelty, but if you can be trying something new, like once a month, that's really good policy for your relationship.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people too, especially with BDSM, think that it's that's the only kind of sex that they have then, is that they have to have this enormous session and role play and whatever every time.
Right.
And you don't. You can have your BDSM session once a month and you can have some really great regular sex between.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The point is checking in. What do I feel like? What do I want? What do I like in general? What do I want right now? How about you? And that's where we get to the next part, which is that negotiation part. Once we have an idea of those things and know how to start talking about them with a partner, bam, now we're cooking with gas, right? Like
Yeah.
now the floodgates have opened and all great things are possible. Like
Yes.
multiple orgasms are possible. The better once a month is possible, right? Like
Right.
setting new records in your relationship now because you're talking about the things. You're not
Yes.
assuming. You're really diving into what's feeling good for each of you, what your desires are. But the key to this negotiation part has to be respecting and appreciating your partner's no.
Yes. Absolutely.
And that means in all forms, in all ways, at all times. And I think for me and how I work with my clients around this, what can really fuel that understanding and that acceptance and respect is thinking about how no is a gift,
Mm.
because no can show us and honor what our yes is as well.
Okay. I love that.
What happens, right, if somebody is just saying yes to anything and they don't really want it, right? We all have like friends like this
Mhm.
whatever, never mind about our partner or lovers. Like, we all have that friend that's like a great pushover, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
bless their heart, they're so sweet. They can't say no to all the favors, to all the extra work at work, to all the, we all have that friend. We all know that person, right?
Yeah.
It's like, sure. Oh my God, I really don't want to, but oh, I can't say no because I'll feel so bad.
Right.
So when that friend says yes to us, like if we're inviting them to the party, like, ugh, how do I know if they really want to go? Are they just being nice? Like, it doesn't feel as good as, I don't know about y'all, but I have my introvert friends that like, ooh, if they say yes to going out with me, I know they're really into this party or this experience we're doing,
Right.
because whew, they usually say no. Like, but that no is what helps us find our yes too. Our yes is on the other side of that no. So when you're able to say no to things without feeling bad about it, that's how you're able to figure out what you actually want,
Oh, I
right?
love that.
Actually want is what we're going for here, right?
Yes.
Like, then it's
So if
possible.
somebody is starting this conversation with their partner and maybe they have some ideas of what they're going to talk about, but they don't really even know enough about the kink community to have a full negotiation, where can they find some of these terms, or are there checklists they can go through, quizzes they can take, anything that can help kind of guide this conversation if they're new to this kind of lifestyle?
Yes, absolutely. There are all kinds of resources. If you just Google like yes, no, maybe list, you'll come up with some really good sources. Now, there's a couple of sources that I really utilize and appreciate that I send my clients to. Depending on what kind of stuff that you're into. But I will give you some links as well to put in the show notes so folks can check some of those out. But another source that I would say that I recommend to couples a lot, that I find to be really helpful to start the conversation in a really low key way, and not necessarily just kink, but like just in general, what you like kind of conversation, is an app that's free. It's called Spicer.
Oh,
And Spicer sends both of you, you get like a list of questions about different things, and you answer yes, no, or maybe.
okay.
If your partner, you can link to your partner's account. And so if your partner also says yes or maybe to each item, then you all both get a notification and you create
Okay.
like a list
Okay.
of questions that like, oh, we might do this together. Oh, you'd be interested in that. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
So then you can kind of start those conversations little by little in a way that where you're not starting from the blue, right?
Sure. I
Oh,
love that.
Spicer about this thing.
Yeah, what a great idea.
Yeah, it's really fun. And really, like, this way, you're not even seeing the things that one of you answered no to.
Right.
Those aren't even on the discussion board then. So that's
Okay,
a great way
excellent.
too to practice your boundaries and practice thinking about, like, would I be interested in this? Like,
Yeah.
maybe, or just no. Great.
Yeah.
Practice your no online if you're not used to saying no.
Yes.
So I have lots and lots of more tips for negotiation, but I would be here all day. I love talking about it. I am all about how to work on communication together. Um, and I think one thing I will say really quick, just as a teaser, if folks want to reach out, like come get a quick session with me, let's talk about it further. But one thing you really want to include in thinking about what you really want, I like to encourage people to think about fact. So think about feelings that you want to feel, right? And the actions, but it's not all just the actions. Spicer's going to give you the actions to talk about. Do you want to talk about the feelings too? Like, ooh, I want to feel bratty. I want to feel dominant. I want to feel, right? I want to
Yep.
feel a little bit mischievous. I want to feel, right, those type of feelings. Our erotic life, remember, is not the same as our daily responsible self life.
Yep.
Context, so fact, feelings, actions, context. What's going on? When is this appropriate? When would spankings be fun to you? Probably not
Mm.
at night when you're about to fall asleep, right?
Yeah.
Not in this context, not in this way, not in a this type of location, only here. Those types of context questions, and then trust. How are we building trust before, during, and after? And so I'm going to talk about the during next. That leads us to our next part, which is the ongoing consent part that I mentioned. We said from the get-go, the consent piece is everything in
Mhm.
BDSM. If we don't
Yes.
have that, it's no longer BDSM. But I think that sometimes when we use the word consent, people imagine like a lawyer, right? They imagine like, oh,
Yeah.
I gotta sign this contract. Or like, I remember when I was a teenager, I had, a late teenager, I had some friends going to college, and there was this whole thing about like Antioch College being, oh, it's too liberal because they want students to really make sure that they're saying yes before every sexual
Mm.
activity. Like, that's just too much. That's taking it too far. Like, there's like this
That's
big
great.
uproar. Like,
Everybody can do that. Yes.
right? So, like, people have so many feelings about consent being like, oh, this is such a burden, or like, this
Right.
is just a legal thing. We got to do this to not get in trouble.
Right.
That's not at all how I view consent, right? My idea of consent is like, this is what we're doing to make sure everybody's feeling good, right?
Yes.
Like, this is how we make sure that this is a good time, not a crappy time.
Right.
Like, anybody want to have crappy sex? Like, no. And if
No.
you ask somebody, like, oh, so do you want your partner to like just go along with it and not really enjoy it? They'd be like, no, right?
Right. Right. Yes. And I love the fact that you say ongoing as well, because it can change during a session. All of a sudden you're cramping in a way that you didn't think you would, and now that's nope, now I got to say no and whatever. And then the next you maybe said no to something in this session that then the next time you're like, "Hey, remember how you wanted to try that and I wasn't into it? Well, today I'm feeling it. Let's try that." So I love the fact that you bring on ongoing consent.
Exactly, exactly. Right. And that's why this no is so great, because this
Yeah.
no also gives us that ability to be like, oh no, but it's a no because XYZ, or it's a
Right.
no like not right now, or it's a no like this just, oh, actually, I feel like I'm about to pass gas. So
Yeah.
this is this position is not gonna work for me.
Right.
Right? Like we don't we don't want people to have a bad time just
Right.
because they thought they wanted to, right? There's
Right.
so many circumstances where like we think this is going to be great, and then in the moment something's going on that makes it not great.
Yep.
Cool, we pivot, we pause, or we stop altogether and try something else another day, right?
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't need to be this rejection experience.
Right. Right.
It's a gift, because then you know we're only doing the things that we're really enjoying.
Absolutely.
So even in the moment, that looks like, in BDSM, we really encourage, in the community, we encourage continuing to check in throughout an experience. And the more intense an experience it is, the more we need to check in
Mhm.
and make sure that things are okay. And so
Right.
the check in might be something verbal, right? Lots of people also use the stoplight method, right?
Yep.
Of like, yellow, ooh, we got to pause or readjust. This is too
Yeah.
intense. And then red is full stop,
Right.
scene over. It's too much for me right now.
Yep. Or
Um,
safe words or what yeah, whatever you have
exactly.
agreed upon. Mhm.
Exactly. But there's also so much to be said for other types of check-ins, right? Especially if people are doing things that make them currently unable to speak.
Mhm.
Might
Yep.
be because their mouth has something in it, but also might be because people can get into really intense states, right? I talked
Yeah.
earlier at the beginning about kind of altered states without drugs or
Mhm.
alcohol, and that is often the case. And so sometimes people end up being kind of nonverbal, even just with like normal, quote unquote, normal vanilla sex or whatever.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are just not able to form words or think
Right.
coherently, which
Right.
is great. That's fine.
Yes. Yes. Love that.
But what a way to be able to check in and know what's happening, right? And try to make sure through different knowing, getting to know our partner and their expressions and their reactions and things like that, and
Yeah.
kind of forcing that verbal bit on people sometimes when it's needed.
Sure.
So safety and pleasure all in one. Ah.
Yes.
And so last but not least, that last bit is aftercare and reflection. Because again, that boundaries piece, that no is a gift, let's help find your yes, continues throughout the whole experience and after the experience, right?
Yeah.
Before, during, and after. We're learning more about like what works for us, what's good for us, what's good for our partner, what did they like,
Yeah.
what went wrong, what was like everybody has silly moments of like, ooh, that sounded like a great idea, was not.
Right. Right.
Right? Like, oh, they stained the sheets with the whipped cream. That was
Yeah.
like, right? Like,
Hot wax really isn't that sexy. Okay, got it.
right, exactly. There's so many things that seem great. And then maybe even in the moment, it was
Mhm.
feeling good, but afterwards it was like, ooh,
Yeah.
I don't know if I would do that one again. Okay,
Right.
cool.
Right.
Good to
Or
know.
maybe I would, but I need it in a different way, or a different position, or a different speed, or something.
Absolutely. Exactly. And so when you're able to have these open conversations, this clear communication about what's good and what's not so great in the moment, that's not a personal attack,
Right.
right? And that doesn't mean you're a bad lover. It means stuff happens. This is an
Yeah.
ongoing process, an ongoing practice. No
Yeah.
big deal. It's not about you or me. This just didn't work for
Yeah.
us.
Right.
Cool. When it's not personal like that, we can get all of this information and learn so much about what's good for us and
Yeah.
create more good times.
Yeah.
So that reflection piece is crucial, sharing with each other in that way, but also the aftercare is such a beautiful thing that honestly I recommend even for folks in their self-pleasure sessions, like even for masturbation, especially if you're somebody who is trying to overcome shame,
Mm-hmm.
then some, or you're just like watching something or thinking about something that's kind of intense, or you have a really good self-pleasure session, aftercare, even then, just taking some time to come back down from that experience to transition
Mm-hmm.
before you like run out and take care of work or children
Yeah.
or whatever things you have going on in the world,
Yeah.
right? We can't go from 100 to 20 in a heartbeat. We need a little
Right.
bit of transition time. And the more intense your play is, the more come down transition
Yeah.
aftercare time you need to both
Absolutely.
physically relax and maybe clean up,
Mm-hmm.
and also to emotionally come
Yeah.
back down
And
from
I
this.
think, like you said earlier, these are such great things for people who even aren't in the BDSM community to involve. I know there was a time where I was having sex and for whatever reason, it was extremely painful that day. And I just stopped and the guy grabbed me and just kind of pulled me into his arms and we just snuggled and he was like, "What's going on?" And I was like, "I don't know." Well, I ended up having an ovarian cyst that I didn't know I had at the time. And
Mhm.
so, but it was like so great in that moment to have that, are we okay, are you okay, what's going on, and that and still to have that physical connection of being held, like, no, I'm not breaking this intimacy with you, I just physically cannot do what we were just trying to do for a reason that hadn't come up before. I'd never had an ovarian cyst before. I had no idea what was going on. And so for me, like, that's such a great way that even in that particular relationship had nothing to do with BDSM, you can still use that aftercare and that negotiation and stuff to kind of figure things out.
Absolutely. And after any kind of sexual experience with a partner or even alone, we're releasing oxytocin, right? We're releasing the hormone to feel good and feel
Mhm.
connected. And so our bodies are already calling for this connection. We
Yeah.
need that physical connection and continuation of some kind in order to transition. It is so beautiful. I'm so glad
Yeah.
that you had that experience too of a person,
Yeah.
your partner being really caring and connected in that moment. I
Yeah.
work with a lot of women who experience painful sex for other reasons, and
Mhm.
it's so difficult to find ways to kind of maintain that connection when they're like, but I
Yeah.
want to be able to have intercourse with my partner,
Right.
but it's so painful. And it's like, no, 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 please don't
Yeah.
do it. It's painful.
Right. We've got so many things. There's so many tools to help you with painful sex. And we certainly talk about that in other episodes on this podcast as well, certainly from the medical standpoint and physical
Mm,
therapy and all those different things, and the psychological aspect, because some of those can be from prior experiences and abuse or something like that, letting go of past things that don't need to be there anymore. So I know this was such an introductory episode, and we're just like touching base, and I'm so going to have you back on here so we can get more to the nitty gritty and experience more things with BDSM. But I'm so appreciative of you coming on today and kind of helping us talk through these important facts and to open our minds a little bit to different experiences we can have in sex. It's awesome.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for giving this space for this wonderful, fun, exciting topic. I am happy to come back and talk about it anytime, to go
All
more in
right.
depth, to share some stories and add
Yes,
some context to it. I would love to, but I really
absolutely.
appreciate having this chance to talk with you about it. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much, Julia. And again, in the show notes, we're going to have links so that you can get in touch with Julia if you want to have sessions, have questions, just get some resources. She's just been such a great resource for me as well. And so I'm just very appreciative of today's episode. And we'll see you guys next time between the sheets.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening and spending time with me today. You can catch new episodes of Between the Sheets every Wednesday, because what better way to add some spice to your life than to have a new podcast on Hump Day? We will continue to explore common, uncommon, and taboo topics related to sexual health and wellness. Please send any comments, questions, or stories to podcastbetweenthesheets@gmail.com. That's all one word, podcastbetweenthesheets@gmail.com. Have a great day. And remember how important it is to discuss these topics with your friends, your family, and of course your partners. In fact, you can like, follow, and share this podcast so they can see it too. See you next time for more sexual health topics between the sheets.